Hello. Hello, Eric. Hello, Charles.
Hello, world.
We're here. We're here finally. I don't know. Finally, I mean, it's a tiny bit late. I think that's basically on time.
It's slightly fashionably late. We
Yeah.
look better this way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm super excited about tonight. We have Erik Tinberg, who is going to play a piece. I'm going to play a piece that I did recently as well after Erik. Erik is using some equipment that I am very fond of, the Dirty Wave M8 tracker. And except he has two of them, so it makes me feel a little bit inadequate, but I'll deal with that.
You can always fix that at the next pre-order window. It's just
Yeah.
waiting for you.
Yeah, the next chunk of change I come across. And then also Charles has graciously offered to help us out with shooting this and getting the stream happening. So that makes it so much easier and so much better because he has incredible gear. So I'm excited for to see the quality afterwards. In any case, Erik, would you like to say anything about your piece before you play it, or?
Sure. So I think I only recently got into kind of performing live. I ended up getting into the Dirty Wave kind of ecosystem somewhat through John's nudging and insistence a couple of months ago. And starting in January, when I had the chance to do Drone Not Drones, I figured the challenge for myself was to always make one new thing for every show. So what I've got tonight is half of an adapted version of what I did at Can Wonderland for Enter the Void, as well as a new piece that I did on the tail end of it, just like for tonight. So it's like half kind of modified content and then half whole cloth kind of original for this. So every month apparently I'm just making a new 8-minute, 10-minute piece. So
And then that's going to eventually become an album, probably.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Because I have another show in May at Envelop, and I have another piece for that. So it's
Fantastic.
every month it's like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, I can hit play and let it roll.
All right. That was beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because like I never thought that I would do this kind of material like in this workflow. Mm-hmm. I guess for a little bit of like discussion about creative process is that John has been trying to sell me on the Dirty Way of M8 for it was a while, and initially I kind of like rejected it because I was like, oh, it's too complicated. I never would get into it, and I also had this assumption that the workflow being so closely tied, I think, historically to things like the demo scene, Amiga music, and chiptune, which aren't ways that I like. That's not my creative voice. For a long time, I was like, oh, this doesn't appeal to me. It won't fit. And then kind of through a meandering path through various bits of hardware, ended up with one of these. And I was like, oh, I love this thing. And then I bought two of them.
Yeah, well, your tracker journey was a little bit different than mine, too.
Yeah.
I mean, you started out with the poly end.
Yes, correct.
And, yeah, for me, I was always interested, but I had the same kind of trepidation that you had. Like, I was like, I'm a keyboard player, and I sequence things. I work with DAWs. I work with, more, things that have knobs or keys.
Yeah.
But, once I started using it, I found, just kind of like it. I've said this before to, to you and some other people, but it's kind of a tedious way to make music. But in the process of that tedium, it's a very different way of making music, and sometimes you can get some pretty interesting results that way.
Yeah, I mean, my background primarily comes from things like a linear workstation. So for people at home, it's like GarageBand is the most ubiquitous linear workstation, but Pro Tools, Cubase, Digital Performer, whatnot. And so I'd always rejected this idea of the tracker workflow because I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. I think time goes left to right.
Yeah.
And to your point about being slightly laborious, one of the things which I find fascinating about this, and this is not something that we need to get into for 30 minutes because I will, is the modulation and the things you can do with like tables are incredible.
Yeah.
And so like it's become a thing where like I have an idea in my head and I can pretty quickly be like, I want a sound that starts here, does this 5 times, does this.
And there's going to be a way to do it.
Yeah, and that's the thing which has been really inspiring. Is like, I can, and they're small. I can do it anywhere. Which is,
and we can get into a longer discussion if you want to after the second piece. We're going to take a very short break, like just enough to re-plug in some cables.
Sure.
And I'm going to play. The piece I'm going to do is it's also with the Dirty Wave M8, but only one of them. But it's going to be manipulated through some software that I developed, which will be sending MIDI signals from visual content, specifically designed to kind of manipulate the texture of the M8 sounds based on the visuals that you'll be seeing. So that's what's coming up next. All right. Thanks everybody for being here and checking out Audio Cookbook Live, Volume 6 we're up to. So the idea I had for this was going to be something that I would do more frequently, maybe once a month. But as you can see, it's kind of a production. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of, amazing help. Thank you, Charles.
You can't see him behind the camera, but Charles is sweating, just
He's
moving and grooving.
He's killing it. And and then also, what Erik did tonight, amazing stuff. So it takes some time, takes some effort. I'd like to do more of these. So hopefully in the future, keep an eye out. Maybe there will be. I don't know. Were there any questions on the chat we could answer? Did you see anything like that?
I can scroll through. A lot of people are talking about how their brains are being reprogrammed by your work.
Oh, okay.
Or gently massaged.
I could do a little bit of an explanation, I suppose.
I mean, that would be cool because you and I have very different approaches to the same sound source.
Yeah. So for me, like the M8, I was using it in a slightly different way, I guess. Still using clips and different kinds of everything. There was no samples. Everything was either FM synthesis or this other synthesizer uses kind of a macro oscillator sort of approach. And so, but the main thing that would be different in the way that I've used the M8 before is that I wrote an application in processing. This is a language that allows you to create applications using the Java language. So it's Java programming. But essentially what I have it do is I have it sending MIDI data to the M8. So one of the things that's powerful about this tiny little device, this is going to sound like an advertisement. Dirty Wave, of course, but it's a small company. Yeah. You can't get these even if you try. But I encourage you to if it's interesting. But really, we're not promoting this. It's more like just a tool that we find really useful. It's just super flexible, and so we can send MIDI signals to it. And so a lot of what you were seeing in the visual part had a corresponding sound to it. So the MIDI, the visuals were created through an algorithm called the Mauer Rose, which is most of the time you see still images of it. It's like it looks like spirographs, But I used basically some algorithms to animate these, and then I'm translating some of that data from those algorithms into essentially kind of like loops of MIDI information, like kind of like almost like a randomness in a way, but smooth randomness that then will repeat. It will repeat in a loop. And I don't know what it's going to do. I have no idea. So every time I run this software, it's going to do a different loop. It's going to change the texture of the sounds in a different way than it did the previous time. And you can actually, if I were to go into this, you could see the, if I start this up again, and I can go into like a screen here where you can see these sliders moving around. And so these sliders are moving around based on the visuals that you see on the screen. So you can kind of see how they're changing. So there's, if I change the way this is working, then you see that the sliders are doing different things now, right? And if I do that again, you can see the sliders are doing something else. So it's based on whatever this generative video does, will manipulate these modulation patterns on the synth, so the texture will kind of morph as the visuals morph. So that's sort of the approach that I took to this particular piece. Or of course, I've done stuff with other approaches using Dirty Wave.
So if you were getting MIDI control change signals out of the processing, was were the notes triggered in the clips, or was that also out of processing?
No, the notes are triggered in the clip, so only texture information.
Cool.
Yeah. And then, so then I can kind of control which clips go where. But when I choose it, I know what notes or what information is going to happen. And then there were some that kind of sounded like kind of staccato. That's actually a low frequency oscillator as well, being used like an envelope.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
So kind of a sawtooth waveform, so it sounds like you're getting these percussive hits where really what's happening is it's a low frequency oscillator that's manipulating the volume of those oscillators. So
Yeah, I was curious, like with like what you were getting out of the processing, like how much of it was. So it's interesting that you have like the bet of it being like reliable kind of melodic sequenced information, and then you have this kind of like control change information coming out of the processing or corresponding or influenced by the processing mathematics, the visuals.
mm-hmm.
And so you have something that like you have some idea of where it's going to go, but not entirely.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah.
It's kind of, for me, it was, the way I wrote this proposal. I performed this at the Seamus conference in Indiana last month, and the proposal I wrote talked about how I feel like this is a piece where I'm kind of collaborating with the sort of devices in a way, instead of just using them as, and just using my own kind of aesthetics or using my own sort of choice of what I want to do musically. I'm allowing, sort of this kind of generative and randomness stuff to kind of enter into the composition, so I can kind of
and I think that's like one of my favorite things. Not to sound like we're just like pitching the dirty web I made for the next 30 minutes.
Or trackers in general.
Yeah, because a lot of this applies not just to one specific device. To be clear, because if you have something like the Polyend tracker or the Mini or the Plus, or if you do software trackers like Nitro Tracker, or if you're an old school head, you've got an Amiga, like you can apply a lot of these in there. And the idea, like your idea, I think where you were going, having this like, you have a piece that you have an idea of where it's going to go, and you have this component that's somewhat uncontrolled, but that you have some control over. So it makes it so it's something that you're always surprised by every time. You're having this dialogue with the composition. One of the things I really found amazing about the tracker workflow is if you use things like clever use of tables, you can have a lot of random events play on top of your like programmed events. So like in the thing that I was playing, I had no control over any of the voices. So like I loaded up something like 15 recordings, and every time it hit to play one, it would choose a random recording, and then it would also choose a random position to start for playing and a random position to start looping it.
Oh, wow.
So like I don't have any idea what it's going to do.
Yeah. So
and like
we're in the same kind of path in that.
And I think when you have that kind of an interaction with like the technology and the composition, it's way more fun. Mm-hmm. Because like I know where the structure is going to go, right? I'm like, baseline drums, I know where that's going to happen. And it's really fun to listen back to it. And I'm like, okay, I know this thing is going to start. I don't know what it's going to do. And so that's why like it would pull a recording or it would pull something that like I didn't plan for, but it would be like a happy accident every time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of times, music technology has been this thing where, you can program it and you can get something very predictable out of it. And it seems like both you and I are trying to kind of do something, the opposite of that, get something unpredictable out of it to, kind of, just kind of see where it goes and kind of, and then have some sort of like, okay, well, I've got to react to this now too. Right?
Yeah,
so it builds upon the idea of improvising.
Yeah.
So we can sort of improvise with these devices versus just kind of forcing them to do exactly what
and it's like, I love that like sweet spot of like, so I played half of this at the Seward Cafe last weekend for the synth solo event.
Yeah.
And it was really cool to go up and be like, I know where it's going to start. I know the progression. I know where it ends, but I don't know a lot of the things it's going to pick. And so I love the idea that I can show up with something that I'm familiar with. It's created intentionally, but it's a dialogue with it when it plays because I don't know where it's going to go. And that's so much more. It's so much more enjoyable as an experience as opposed to like I hit play and I just walk off.
Yeah.
Because it's so much more engaging to be like, oh, it's doing this now. I have to adapt.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's fixed media.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, it's kind of how a lot of electronic music got started. Was the idea of, okay, well, if this is, super, difficult to make, right?
Yeah.
And originally, with like tape music and stuff, really difficult to make. You're cutting apart tape and tape loops and taping them together and doing
I
kinds of
mean,
things like this.
mad
Of
respect.
course, fixed media is,
Yeah.
it makes sense in those situations. But I think, like the idea of being able to kind of like, in a way, it's like improvising with these devices.
It's funny. Someone in the chat said it sounds a lot like improv with acoustic instruments.
Yeah. So,
Which,
but it's like, that I do a lot of improvising with other musicians,
Yeah.
and that's to me always better.
Yeah.
Like for my soul.
Yeah.
Right. But this is something that I can do it on my own.
Yeah.
And I can still get some of that satisfaction of improvising.
Yes. Yeah.
With a consciousness in a way, or it's obviously not a consciousness, but
Yeah,
it feels like there's some push and pull.
It's like this. For me, it's like it's an environment that you're setting up intentionally, and then you don't necessarily know where it's going to go, but like you've created the engine. It's kind of like having, I guess, like a terrarium. Like you create the environment and just see what happens.
Yeah.
So you have an idea of what it's going to do, and you have some control.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much more engaging to just like set up these weird things where it's like, on every step it's going to do something different. I don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it might not be great, or it might be exciting.
Yeah. And that tracker workflow, has a lot of components that sort of allow for that, I think. Which.
Okay. Apparently somebody asked for my. Oh, okay. So the vocal recordings. This is gonna come up every time, so I have to plug this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for about 15 years, I have collected and recorded answering machines. I've recorded over 600 of them, and I've put like the best of them on a Tumblr page, which is answerphone.tumblr.com. It's also been this weird thing where I've had other musicians use it for work. There's a guy in England who goes by the name. It's I remember my Instagram is Jimbo Jones. It's a milk related name. I can find it. His album is great, and like I'm really excited that he's going to be doing more material. Let's see.
You should also link to answer phone in the chat.
I will do that. Return of the Milk. That's Jimbo's project. So like in England, Return of the Milk uses some of them, and he does great work. I know a friend of mine in, I want to say Scotland, used them in a master's thesis composition. The Found Footage Festival has used it. WFMU, which is the shirt of the evening. Represent WFMU out of Jersey. And so yeah, like people can use it for whatever. And it's been a really interesting thing where I'm like archiving human experience, for better or worse. Sometimes it's funny. I always think of Shauna's favorite recording. Shauna's my wife, and her favorite recording, bar none, is a guy who calls in. He's trying to make a salsa recipe, and he's like, "Oh, I really want to make this recipe. Like when you get home, I'm excited to make it for you." Like da 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 da. And he's like, "I can't find one thing. I can't find black olives." And he's like lamenting how frustrated he is. And he goes in the pantry and he finds them. And then for 30 seconds, all he does is have like joy, like unbridled joy about black olives. And it's just like, it's very heartwarming.
That's amazing. I love it.
It's funny when you mention the synth engines too. One of the other things I think that I really appreciate about modern trackers is like in my head, I always went back to thinking that they were tied to those, like 4 channels, pulse, saw, sine, noise, like chip tunes. But then you had things like the Polyam tracker and the Dirty Wave, and even back then you had samples, but like you can load far larger samples now, and that to me has been just a huge change.
Yeah, you could virtually have a backing track in a tune if you wanted to. It was recorded entirely outside of it.
Yeah, because like I got really into like most of the stuff that I actually sequenced, a lot of it was recordings from a friend Evo at Glitch Machines, where I'll take things like synthesized drums and like reverse them, play them so they're slowed over 4 phrases, so they're super drony. And like it's funny because that's something I always thought you couldn't do on a tracker, and then now that we have these modern kind of takes on it, that you can load anything into it and some people load entire 25-minute songs and just play them straight.
Yeah, the FM synth engine is one of my favorites
Yes.
on the Dirty Wave. And one of the things that they just did with the recent firmware was make it so you could use, typically when you do FM synthesis, it's sine waves, and there's an algorithm for how these sine waves interact with each other. They can be modulators, or they can be carriers. And so a modulator would modulate another waveform, and a carrier would be one that was actually coming through the outputs of the synth. Well, this particular synth engine, FM synth engine, allows you to use not only a sine wave, but it allows you to use a triangle wave, a square wave, any of the waveforms that you would kind of associate with analog synthesis. Then it also lets you use wavetable waveforms. So a wavetable waveform is one that is digital and comes from perhaps an acoustic sound, or it comes from some kind of digitized sound. It could be acoustic, it could be synthesized as well, but it means that you have a whole infinite variety, essentially. It's not infinite, but it's a huge variety of different waveforms that can be used to either modulate or be a carrier, right? And so it gives you just a whole other variety of textures that you can create. That's a lot of what I was doing with this particular piece, was manipulating how the FM synth works with using some of those wavetable oscillators, and then just manipulating how they feed into each other, with those sliders we saw moving.
John, do you want to turn the master? Someone's saying there's buzzing, and I wonder if it's just the mixing board.
Yeah, turn that down.
Now it's just straight mic, so.
Yeah. Is there still buzzing?
Someone is saying there's buzzing,
okay.
so. Maybe it was the mixing board.
All right. Well, do we have any other questions on the chat, or?
Let's see if we go.
Still buzzing level, still sustained. Sorry about the buzzing. We're probably going to wrap up soon anyway. But yeah, I just really appreciate everyone coming, checking it out. If you so desire, not no obligation or anything, but the link MN is a fantastic organization. So do take a look and see if it's something you might feel like donating to. So otherwise, keep an eye out for next time, and congratulations, Eric. That was beautiful.
Thank you. And then John plays regularly, and you play very regularly.
I guess I should mention what I have coming up, which is May 15th. So so it's a while from now, but I'll be playing with Anthony Cox and Sewell Singh. Anthony Cox is a bass player, world-renowned, amazing artist. I think he's going to be playing cello with us.
Oh, right.
And then Sewell Singh is a fantastic tabla player.
Right.
So, and then I'm going to be running the piano through a modular synth. So it's going to be.
Where's that at? Where are you playing?
At Berlin.
Oh, right. Okay.
Berlin is a nightclub in downtown Minneapolis, not the city.
Yeah, not international. I don't know how I can compete with that, because I have a gig the exact same night.
You do?
Yeah, I'm playing at Envelop at Mirror Lab.
Oh, that's the 15th?
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
There's two separate sides of town where you can go see weird stuff at night.
That sucks. I should. I can't believe that happened. Jesse.
It happened. Jesse Whitney, if you're watching. But yeah, no, that's another really good series. That's been running at Mirror Lab. I think it's now bi-monthly, where it's these very intentional, I guess it's deep listening sessions. So it's 3 acts, probably only fits 30 people in the room, but I'm excited for that. I've been telling Jesse that that's been a goal of mine since I started this. Was if I can get good enough to play it in Envelop, so maybe one day I'll be good enough to play Berlin.
Well, now the people who would come to Berlin are probably going to go to Envelop. So. All right. Well, we're fighting over May 15th, but thanks again, everyone. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Charles.
And all the best to all of you. Keep listening to music and being weird. Cheers.